October 1962. Tucson, Arizona. A small aircraft repair hangar on the south end of Ryan Airfield, 12 miles west of the city. The smell of aviation fuel and hot aluminum and dry desert air hangs over the tarmac in the late afternoon heat. A county land agent named Cheryl arrives at 4 o'clock with a condemnation notice, a surveyor's map, and the particular confidence of a man backed by a government stamp. Hank Duvall is 58 years old. He has run this hangar for 16 years on the same packed caliche ground where he landed his first plane in 1946. By sundown, the county is going to take half his airstrip to build a drainage easement for a subdivision that does not exist yet. Here is the story. Hank Duvall flew B-17 seconds out of Foggia, Italy from January of 1944 to the end of the war in Europe. He flew 31 missions over Germany and Austria and the oil fields of Romania. He brought his crew home every time, not always intact, not always on 2 engines, but home every time. He came back to Tucson in September of 1945 with a distinguished flying cross, a left knee that would never fully straighten again, and a certainty about what he wanted to do with the rest of his life that very few men are lucky enough to have at 31. He had grown up in Tucson, the son of a hardware store owner on Congress Street. He had learned to fly at 17 on a Piper Cub at the old Tucson Municipal Field, paying for the hours by washing aircraft and sweeping hangars on weekends. By the time he enlisted, he had 200 hours in his logbook. The Army gave him 1,000 more. When he came home, he had more hours in the air than most men accumulate in a lifetime, and he knew aircraft repair the way you know something you have depended on for your life, which is completely. He leased the parcel at Ryan Airfield in the spring of 1946 from a Tucson attorney named Brock, who had bought the land during the war years and had no particular plan for it. The lease was $40 a month. Hank built the hangar himself over the course of 1 summer, with help from 2 men he had served with, both of them mechanics from the 15th Air Force who had nowhere better to be that summer and were glad of the work and the company. He opened Duvall Aircraft Service in September of 1946, the same month he had come home a year before. He thought that was fitting. Hank fixed Pipers and Cessnas and the occasional warbird that came through Tucson in the hands of a man who had flown it during the war and could not quite let it go. He fixed agricultural spray planes and the survey aircraft that flew the copper mine country south of Tucson and the Border Patrol Cessnas that worked the line. He charged fair rates. He kept meticulous maintenance logs on every aircraft he touched, the kind of logs that held up in court and in insurance claims and in FAA inquiries, because Hank understood that in aviation the paperwork was as important as the wrench work. He kept his own logbook current every day of his working life. He bought the parcel from Brock's estate in 1954 when Brock died and the estate needed to liquidate. He paid $11,000, which was what it was worth, and financed it through a Tucson savings and loan at 4% over 10 years. He paid it off in 8. He owned the land clear from 1962 onward. The airstrip was 1,200 feet of packed caliche that he graded himself twice a year with a borrowed tractor. It was enough for the aircraft he worked on. It was everything he needed. Then Pima County announced the West Side Drainage Improvement Project in August of 1962. The project called for a drainage easement 200 feet wide running north to south across the western edge of Ryan Airfield. The easement would take 300 feet off the west end of Hank's airstrip. 300 feet off a 1,200-foot strip left 900 feet. 900 feet was not enough for half the aircraft Hank serviced. It was not enough for the spray planes. It was not enough for anything with a loaded gross weight above 2,500 pounds. It was the end of the business, dressed up in engineering language, and a surveyor's map. The county sent the first notice in August. The condemnation was authorized under eminent domain. The compensation offered was $4,000 for the easement rights, a figure the county assessor had arrived at by valuing the land at agricultural rates rather than commercial airfield rates, a distinction worth approximately $14,000 that the assessor's methodology had carefully avoided making. Hank hired an attorney in Tucson who told him the valuation was wrong and the methodology was challengeable, but that eminent domain cases were slow and expensive and the county had more patience than most clients. The attorney was right about all of it. By October, Hank had spent $1,900 on legal fees and the county had not moved its position by $1. Cheryl, the land agent, had been out twice before. Each time he was pleasant and professional and completely immovable. He is pleasant and professional and completely immovable on the afternoon he arrives with the final condemnation notice. Hank reads it at the workbench inside the hangar. He has a Cessna 172 with a cylinder issue on the stand behind him. He has 3 more aircraft scheduled for the week. He sets the notice down on the bench beside his logbook. He looks at the airstrip through the open hangar door. The afternoon light is long and gold across the caliche and the desert scrub beyond the fence. He has looked at that strip every working day for 16 years. He does not say anything to Cheryl. There is nothing to say that the attorney has not already said in better language. Cheryl leaves the notice and the surveyor's map and drives back toward Tucson in his county truck. Hank stands at the bench for a while. Then he goes back to the Cessna. 20 minutes later, a dark green Land Rover comes off the Ryan Airfield access road and parks outside the hangar. The man who gets out is compact and square in the shoulders, wearing a khaki shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms and a pair of faded canvas trousers. He is 32 years old. He has been in Tucson since Monday, 4 days into a week of desert driving that he had planned loosely and was executing even more loosely, which was exactly how he had intended it. He came out to Ryan Airfield because somebody at the motor court on Miracle Mile had told him there was a man at the South Hangar who kept a pristine Stearman biplane and sometimes took people up if they asked right. He has wanted to fly in a Stearman since he was 19 years old. He walks into the hangar. He looks at the Cessna on the stand. He looks at the tools on the bench. He looks at the condemnation notice and the surveyor's map beside Hank's logbook. He looks at Hank. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. You the man with the Stearman, he says. Hank looks up. Out back, he says. Not sure I'm taking anyone up today. The man nods. He looks at the surveyor's map. He picks it up without asking. He studies it for a moment. He sets it down. County, taking your strip, 300 feet off the west end, Hank says. Eminent domain, drainage easement for a subdivision. The man looks at the map again. He looks at the airstrip through the open door. He looks at Hank. Who is your attorney? Hank tells him. A man on Stone Avenue. The man reaches into the breast pocket of his khaki shirt. He takes out a small notebook, the kind that fits in a shirt pocket, and a pencil. He writes 2 names on a blank page and tears it out and sets it on the bench beside the logbook. First name is a land use attorney in Phoenix, he says. He has beaten 3 eminent domain cases in Maricopa County in the last 4 years on valuation methodology alone. The second name is an FAA regional safety officer in Albuquerque. You call the FAA man first. You tell him a county drainage easement is going to reduce an active commercial airstrip below FAA minimum landing distance standards for the aircraft currently operating there. You ask him to put that in writing. Hank looks at the paper. He looks at the man. Once the FAA puts safety concerns in writing, the man says, the county's project timeline goes into federal review. That buys your attorney 6 months minimum. And a condemnation that creates an FAA safety finding is worth a lot more than agricultural land rates in front of a judge. Hank is quiet for a moment. He picks up the torn notebook page. He reads both names. You know these men? He says. The first one, the man says, flew with his brother in Korea. He will take your call. He picks up his notebook. He puts it back in his shirt pocket. He looks at the Stearman through the hangar's rear door. Sitting on the caliche in the gold afternoon light, the red and yellow paint bright against the desert. She airworthy? He says. Hank looks at the Stearman. Flew her Tuesday, he says. The man looks at him. He almost smiles. How long to pre-flight? They flew for 40 minutes in the late afternoon over the Sonoran Desert west of Tucson. The Stearman open cockpit and slow and exactly right for the kind of flying that has nothing to do with getting anywhere. Hank flew from the rear seat. The man rode in the front. He did not speak on the radio. He put his hands on the stick once when Hank offered it, and flew a slow turn over the Santa Cruz River Valley with the ease of a man who has done it before. Then he gave the stick back and looked out at the desert and said nothing for the rest of the flight. They landed as the sun was touching the Tucson mountains to the west. Hank taxied the Stearman to the tie-down and shut the engine down. The man climbed out of the front cockpit and dropped to the ground and stood looking at the airstrip and the hangar and the desert beyond the fence. He shook Hank's hand at the Land Rover. He did not leave a name. He said the attorney in Phoenix was expecting a call before Friday. He got in the Land Rover and drove back up the access road toward the highway and was gone before the dust settled. Hank called the FAA safety officer in Albuquerque the following morning. The officer listened for 12 minutes. He asked for the surveyor's map and the condemnation notice by mail. He sent a written finding to Pima County in November, stating that the proposed easement would reduce Ryan Airfield's active runway below FAA-recommended minimum standards for the aircraft categories currently operating there, and that the county's project as drawn posed a public safety concern under federal aviation regulations. The county revised the drainage project. The easement was moved 400 feet south, away from the airstrip entirely, through county-owned desert scrub that had no commercial value and had been left out of the original plan because routing through it added 3 weeks to the construction schedule. The revised project broke ground in March of 1963. Hank's airstrip was untouched. The Phoenix attorney sent a bill for $400. Hank paid it in 2 installments. It was the best $400 he ever spent, which he said to his wife Ruth at the kitchen table on the evening the final county approval came through. And she agreed with him, and neither of them said the other thing they were both thinking, which was the name of the man who had come in off the access road in a green Land Rover and asked about the Stearman and left a torn notebook page on the bench. Hank Duvall ran Duvall Aircraft Service at Ryan Airfield until 1979, when his left knee finally made the decision for him that he had been refusing to make himself. He was 65 years old. He had been flying for 48 years. He flew the Stearman one last time on the day he retired, alone, over the desert west of Tucson, and landed it and tied it down and put the chocks under the wheels and walked back to the hangar and locked it. He gave the keys to his apprentice, a young man from Nogales named Flores, who had been learning the trade at the bench for 6 years. Flores ran the hangar for 22 more years. He kept the maintenance logs in the same format Hank had used. He kept Hank's logbook on the shelf above the bench where Hank had kept it. He kept the Stearman flying until 2001, when a hard landing cracked a spar, and the repair cost more than the aircraft's insured value, and the decision made itself. The torn notebook page with the 2 names on it stayed in the front cover of Hank's logbook from October of 1962 until Hank died in 1991. Ruth found it when she went through his things. She had known for a long time where it came from. She framed it with a photograph of the Stearman on the caliche in the afternoon light, the picture Flores had taken from the hangar door on the day of Hank's last flight. The frame hangs in the Pima Air and Space Museum on Valencia Road in Tucson, donated by Ruth in 1993. On clear days, you can see Ryan Airfield from the museum parking lot, 12 miles to the west. The same caliche strip Hank graded twice a year, with a borrowed tractor for 33 years. The strip is still active. Light aircraft still land there in the morning and depart in the evening, and the desert is still the same desert. It was in October of 1962, when a green Land Rover came off the access road and a man asked if the Stearman was airworthy. The placard below it reads, October 1962. A man came into a hangar at Ryan Airfield and picked up a surveyor's map from a workbench. He left 2 names on a torn notebook page. Then he asked if the Stearman out back was airworthy. It was. They flew west over the desert until the sun went down. He was the king of cool. He never cared about the rules, but he always knew how to do the right thing. If this story reached you, do me a favor. Pass it on. Share it with a motor enthusiast in your life or a friend who never bows to the system. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more McQueen stories coming, and unfortunately, they don't make rebel souls like Steve McQueen anymore.